2025. And first item is approval of the agenda, and note that there's no roll call vote required unless a committee member offers an amendment to the agenda. So are there any amendments offered to today's agenda? Hearing none, I'll ask that we approve the minutes of the July 17th, 2025 TAC Funding and Programming Committee by roll call. And Robbie?
Okay. Anoka County, OJ.
Aye.
Carver County.
This is Drew Plummer. Aye.
Thank you. Dakota County. Hennepin County, Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County, Roggenbuck. Scott County, Jessen.
This is John Rudolph. Aye.
And Rudolph. Thank you. Washington County, Dahlheimer.
Aye, but this is Lissa Leitner.
Leitner. Thank you, Lissa. Egan Mathis. Eden Prairie Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
I'll vote aye, even though I wasn't present, but I was able to catch the notes.
Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis, Stewart.
Yep. Aye.
Plymouth, Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Weather. Metro Transit, Janowiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit, Shoal.
Aye.
DNR, Spooner, Walsh.
I'll abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
MnDOT, Blake Ped, McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro District, Tag. MnDOT State Aid, Brown.
Aye.
MPCA, AO.
Would abstain. Lauren attended the meeting.
Met Council, MTS, Henniker.
Aye.
TAP Coordinator, Kotsukos.
Aye.
Chair of the motion had 16 ayes and 2 abstentions.
Thank you. All right, the next item is public comment on committee business. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to comment on the business for today? Hearing none, we'll move on to the TAB report.
Thank you, Chair. TAB met yesterday, October 15th. For the Chair's report, Hovland reported that the Regional Solicitation Policymaker Work Group and TAB Executive Committee had met before TAB. The Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement was discussed at the TAB Executive Committee. Allison Walcott, the Council Tribal Liaison, recommended reading the acknowledgement quarterly or seasonally, or maybe when TAB is making a major decision. TAB will vote on this at a later date. There are approximately 75,000 Native Americans in the 7-county metro area. There was also a certificate presented to Lisa Freeze of Scott County on her retirement after 18 years of service on the Technical Advisory Committee and TAC Planning Committee. For the MnDOT report, Connie Sahibjim reported on the statewide fatalities. As of October 14th, there were 298 fatalities statewide. Of these, 12 were bike, 35 pedestrian, 53 motorcycle, 12 ATV, and 1 snowmobile. And this is compared to 371 in 2024. And trending is that in the metro area continues to have 1/3 of the statewide fatalities and 2/3 of the statewide pedestrian traffic fatalities. MnDOT District Freight Plan public comment period is open until October 19th. Congress was unable to pass a fiscal year budget by the end of September and has entered shutdown. FHWA and FTA continue to operate. Other parts of U.S. DOT are affected. Reimbursements to states for formula programs at FHWA and FTA continue as normal since the full year of contract authority is available. And since all of FHWA and FTA personnel are paid by other funding means besides annual appropriations. And snow and ice season is approaching, and MnDOT is wrapping up construction season, but will continue to work as long as possible. For the MPCA, Frank Kolash reported that the draft climate action framework will be completed soon and released for public comment. The Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change will review the draft on October 21st. There are 2 grants out, one for all communities in Minnesota, 1.6 million available, and one for small communities under 10,000 population with 1.1 million available. These are for planning for climate resiliency, for wastewater infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, and broad general community resiliency. This is the last round of funding. MPCA has granted more than 94 million total. There is a grant open for EV fast charging along highway corridors. It's open through December 9th for 1.89 million. And this is from the VW settlement. The original settlement was $47 million. By giving out the funding in phases, interest has accrued and the total that will be given out will be 52 million. And for MPCA, there has been no funding challenges yet with the shutdown. And so they will continue and let us know next month of any changes. For the Metropolitan Airports Commission, Chair Hovland read a written report that was submitted. October 15th and 16th are likely the 5th and 6th busiest days at MSP, with 50,000 expected to go through security each day. And else, Chair Hovland also reported that Rich King will be retiring. For the Metropolitan Council, Deb Barber reported that she will continue serving as the TAB representative while serving as the interim council chair. Metro Transit launched Metro Microservice in Blaine, and the Green Line extension passed another milestone with trains are out now testing on the line. Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that the suburban transit providers' ridership continues to increase. Maple Grove Transit has scheduled extra trips for the University of Minnesota demand. Southwest Transit's fixed rail service and express service has increased 26% last month compared to a year ago, and their autonomous vehicle ridership is up 20%. The Minnesota Public Transit Association recognized MVTA at their conference in Rochester with its Management Innovation Award for the successful launch of MVTA's eJust electric vehicles used in connection with its Connect microtransit service. And former council chair Zelli was recognized as a friend of transit. They had one action item. It was a streamlined tip amendment that came through the TAC committee for the Reconnecting Committee's pilot program planning grant, which was added to the tip. There were 3 information items, one update on the arterial bus rapid transit, both on how the current service has been running since implemented, and then their study for the next 3 routes that will be recommended. There was an update on the travel behavior inventory overview and what the plans are for future funding needs. And then there was an update for regional solicitation evaluation. The policymaker work group had met prior to TAB. The group discussed setting local match percentages for active transportation applications, the application schedule, the application's connections to 2050 transportation policy plan goals and objectives, and reviewed program performance measures and data tracking. There was discussion on the dedicated funding for the arterial bus rapid transit, considered setting a minimum for 30 million and discussed whether to set a maximum level to provide flexibility. The work group will continue discussion in November. There was also discussion on community considerations, which is the former equity category, and how they can best function. Conversation will also continue on the measures in November. TAB will try to complete the work on the 2026 solicitation by the end of December 2026. Glenn Johnson reported on the active transportation work group. There is one more meeting in October for that group, and they will be writing up notes on what items were not covered, which then can be continued on for discussion in a 2028 solicitation. And that is my tab report.
Thank you, Elaine. Very extensive and lots going on, so appreciate the report. Moves us on to business items. The first item of business is 2025-30 Carver County CASA 40 HSIP project. And this is a scope change request. Robbie, I think you'll give us a briefing on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The 2025-30 is a scope change request for Carver County's CASA 40 HSIP project. So Carver County requests a scope change to reduce the lengths of its CASA 40 improvements with the request to retain full retention of federal funds. So in 2022, Carver County was awarded $2 million in HSIP funding to do some general safety improvements on CASA 40, widening shoulders, providing a safety edge, provide signing and pavement markings from CASA 52 to CASA 50. Their local match at the time of the application was $3.4 million, or 63% of the total cost of $5.4 million. And the program year for the project is 2027. Since then, they've done preliminary design. And through that work, they identified some issues north of the Bevins Creek Bridge and south of CASA 50. Those issues include the presence of cultural and environmental elements. There's an existing condition where the residential driveways are already pretty steep, and these changes would then make those driveways steeper, and regrading might lessen the driveway grade, but it might encroach on existing septic drain fields. And third, 2022 study identified a potential need to realign CASA 40 north of that same bridge over Bevins Creek to accommodate future corridor needs. So in reviewing this scope change, we go through first a scoring analysis. And a scoring analysis is somewhat difficult to do in retrospect, but we look at the changes and see whether there might be some moderate improvement or moderate diminishment in that score. And through our scoring analysis, we found that there would likely be very little change / no change to the scores for these projects as applied. Additionally, the project scored 73 points higher than the highest scoring unfunded project. So for this project to go unfunded, it would have to reduced in score quite a bit, which we didn't see any cause for because of the scope change. So as a result of that, staff does not see a rationale to deny the request based on scoring. And that brings us to funding. So in the scope change policy, it directs TAC funding and programming to allow new eligible elements to be added to a project scope. However, federal funds cannot be shifted from removed elements to new elements unless those removed elements are being done as a part of some other program project. So those removed elements, as a part of that 2022 study, they might be done in a future project, but that hasn't been programmed yet. So therefore, it can be argued as a part of the policy that federal funds could be removed proportional to the value of the removed elements as a percentage of the entire project. And I know that's a mouthful. We provide the rationale in the footings of each of these tables and at the bottom of the action transmittal. At their estimation, which jives with our calculation, 13.9% or 14% of the project is being removed. So it's justified that you would then take 14% of the $2 million for the federal funding and have that be removed. So we give these two options. Both are in accordance with the scope change policy. It's up to this committee's discretion and to make a recommendation, and then ultimately TAB's discretion. So those two options are retention of all federal funding because the applicant is overmatched, or the applicant returned $280,000 of federal funds, which represents 14% of the original federal fund award. The return of 14% of the federal fund award is proportionate to the value of those removed elements. We provide these tables to kind of break down the options. So the table 2A is the original application funding. 2B is the requested scope change with federal funding retained. And table 2C is scope change funding with the federal funding reduction. We'll go back up to the top. The recommended motion will need an addendum at the end based on the discussion and what this group thinks for a recommendation from those two options. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Thanks, Robbie. So the potential reduction is proportionate with regard to the overmatch, correct? And in other words, taking out the 14% of the project elements just reduces proportionally both the cost or the project match as well as the federal funds. Am I correct?
There's 14% of the federal award, so it's
Correct.
just the federal funding that we're considering.
Okay. Right.
The project being overmatched is obviously a benefit because because the project's overmatched.
And from a standpoint of the scoring, I know that's can be difficult in retrospect. What staff is saying is that the scoring isn't materially changed or dramatically changed. Not necessarily zero, but it was kind of de minimis change there. Okay.
And you can see as part of the score, the crash modification factor is a significant portion of the score. And in the packet of information, we have the original application for the project. And you can see that all the crash modification factors that are included in the original application are still present in the project. So we don't see a reduction in that. It would still be a part of a plan. So those are two major parts of the score that wouldn't be reduced as a part of this change.
Okay, thank you. We'll open it up for discussion, and it looks like Joe might have been in first. Joe or Elaine? Both of you
Elaine
are in
beat
there.
me there.
Okay.
Elaine beat me, so she can go.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add in with the one reason we do look at the scoring is to see if the segment that was removed would have reduced the scoring enough that if that was submitted without that segment, would they still have scored well enough? And then with the HSIP applications now allowing more than the 90-10, this project, if it had been submitted without that segment, would have still scored the same and been funded fully.
Okay, thank you for that.
For consideration.
Yeah. Okay. Joe?
And that's not outrageously different from my comment. It's really difficult when you're looking at this to really show that a score would be greatly different. So it's pretty common to look at a project like this and say, all right, it's a project of some length, and now it's going to be of less length. But really, all of these scores can come out the same unless you're taking off some of the scores. So this makes a lot of sense, and these are things that are maybe out of the applicant's control. That said, the funding part of it has been a tricky thing because people, don't necessarily have the appetite to be punitive, but it's not connected to the score as much as it's a way to incentivize like folks to do all of their project. In any case, I'm not advocating a vote one way or the other, but I think there is a difference between on the funding that's got no real tie to the score. But to Robbie's earlier point, like when you look at these scores, usually if you reduce the length of a project, you're not going to lose a huge chunk of score, unless you happen to take out the one big piece that really impacts one of these scores. So I don't know if I really said anything there, but I would just state that the scores are separate from the funding discussion.
No, I think you put it well between you and Elaine. I think that was kind of a similar comment there. So, Lucas?
Hi, I'm Lucas Rubash, the project manager on this project from Carver County. Just wanted to chime in on the funding breakdown options. We do show on the application new project elements. I was looking for that on here. But we've seen some price increases to accommodate the project with the current standards out there and to mitigate both cultural and wildlife resources that are in the area. So looking at an additional $900,000 of fee, whereas the segment that we're proposing to remove here is $750,000. So there's a net gain, a net increase of cost for the project, even with the reduction of scope. And while we do not have a funded project or a programmed project to realign 40 north of this bridge, that is an expected item to occur within the next 15 years, largely due to a development that is being proposed and will include and increase the ADT in this area and have some different traffic patterns that will come of it. So don't need to be long-winded here, so appreciate the time today discussing this scope change.
Thanks, Lucas. Elaine?
Yeah, the reason we didn't mention the increased elements, we do have in the policy that the federal funding can't be used on the new elements. So if the project had been funded at 90% federal, 10% is the total, and elements were removed and others added in, we would not be able to put the federal funding on the new elements. We would definitely have to cut the segment or the funding for the segment removed. The fact that it's overmatched is where we end up having a discussion, and that's a relatively new conversation with the HSIP applications by them removing their total cost maximum for the projects. But we can't put the federal funding on the new elements.
Okay. Thank you.
And
go
Chair,
ahead.
I apologize. I did something weird to my Teams and I can't raise my hand.
Yeah.
But wait, watch this. There we go. And there's a very good reason for that. And this is more of a let's refresh people on the scope change policy. Is that, you know, sometimes people reduce a project and then they decide they want to do something else just to get the money. And so we're trying to disincentivize that. And that's why what Elaine just said was built into the policy. And that's more of a big picture topic, but I think sometimes it's fun, or not fun, but nice to remind us of the policy, because it's nuanced in points for sure.
Thank you. Other questions, discussion? If not, oh, go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Jared. Maybe this question is for Carver County. That section that you're proposing to remove, that 14%, that looked like it's more of the higher density section of the corridor. And I was just wondering if you have any temporary improvements for safety in that corridor until that future development would take place, or is proposed or is built?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a very good question. I will see about what thoughts are rolling around here on the county side. As far as I've been made aware, the project is intending to stop work and stop efforts at the bridge. But that is a reasonable ask. I will say that segment has seen fewer incidents of property and severe injury or fatalities compared to the rest of the segments of the area in question. So not saying it's not a concern, but it is something that we'll keep in mind. That area is also posted 30 miles an hour, and having a narrow roadway after a widened roadway should help, hopefully, cue drivers into a different setting until we get that area realigned. So,
Go.
Lucas, there was just enough uncertainty there that if you do go back and figure out that there is a different or better answer to that, why don't you let either Robbie King or Elaine Brown, or not Elaine, Colleen Brown know, and we can work that into the TAC agenda item. If you go back to the county and somebody says, yeah, we are doing something. Just a thought in case it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Okay, other questions, other comments? Or motion to recommend the scope change under scenario, I guess the tables 2B or 2C.
This is Alyssa. I'll make the motion.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Alyssa.
I was just making the motion.
Oh, okay.
Chair, if I can, listen,
Yeah.
the question on is to add one of these two options to the end of the recommended motion, whether we recommend to retain federal funding for the application for the scope change, or to recommend returning $280,000 of federal funds.
Correct. Alyssa, do you have an intent with either of those for your motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to retain the fund. I think that meets the policy, or at least what it's attempting to do in this kind of nuanced situation, in my opinion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Clean Brown State Aid second.
Any discussion? If seeing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Screen's in order. Anoka County, OJ.
Aye.
Carver County, Flommer.
Aye.
Dakota County. Hennepin County, Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County, Rockenbuck. Scott County, Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County, Leitner. Washington County, Leitner. Oh, round back. Egan, Mathis. Eden Prairie, Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley, Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis, Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth, Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit, Genowiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit, Scholl.
Aye.
DNR, Spooner, Walsh.
Aye.
And Bike Ped, McCormick.
Aye.
And Metro District. MnDOT State Aid, Brown.
Aye.
MPCA, AO.
Aye.
And Council MTS, Henniker.
Aye.
Tab Coordinator, Kutsukos.
Aye.
Chair, my counter for the votes has failed on my spreadsheet, but there were all votes in the affirmative.
Thanks, Robbie. Appreciate it. All right. Next item of business is 2025-31, and it's the 2026 Regional Solicitation Federal Funding Application Categories. And Steve and Joe are on the list for this one. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Chair. Steve Peterson is on the road and may chime in if needed, if I miss something, which is nearly certain, or if there's certain questions. But I'll be doing this next item and every other item for the next few, along with Joe Whiting doing the active transportation counterparts to these items for the next few action items we do. So we have a little slideshow here to show what the recommended motions are. And hopefully that will save people from having to try to read certain things. So this one here is 2025-31, the Regional Solicitation Federal Funding Application Categories. This is reminiscent of a slide that a lot of you have seen many times over of various colors. And what has been being recommended by the policy working group is that that funding and program recommend to TAC the following 12 federal funding application categories as listed here on this slide. And I think a lot of people have seen this quite a bit, but let me know if there's anything else you want said about it, or if there's any bigger discussion that we want to have about it. So this is intentionally brought into some higher categories. The first two are safety, and then we have dynamic and resilient that fits in with the TPP, and those that's from numbers 3 to 10, and then the bottom two are our environment categories. But it has diverted a little bit from the 2024 regional solicitation but not a lot. But if you have any questions about this, let me know, and either I or Steve or somebody will do our best.
All right. So, so the recommended motion basically sets the categories for the regional solicitation for 2026, and this has been kind of the breakdown for some time, and kind of under more detailed discussion about how to how applications might work and how much allocation there would be to these different categories. Correct?
Yes, Chair. I will get into allocations to categories
Sure.
a bit later.
Yep.
But so what you see here, I can certainly get into things like, for example, number 3, regional bike facilities is very reminiscent of the $5.5 million maximum we had last time, and you don't see the pedestrian facilities category. That's going to be in the next item under active transportation. It's been recommended to move the smaller scale bike projects and the pedestrian projects into the active transportation, which doesn't have federal funding. Transit expansion is a long-standing category along with ABRT. Transit customer experience kind of mirrors the last category we had, transit modernization. Congestion management strategies is kind of the answer to what used to be known way back in the day as expansion. New interchanges is kind of the interchange version of the ABRT. Bridge connections has been around, and then the EV charging infrastructure is new, and TDM has been around. So this mirrors and funds a lot of the same projects we've been funding in the past. It sorts it differently. But the interchanges, we are looking at maybe a bigger maximum, and that comes up later on in this discussion too, to sort of recognize the cost of those projects and how, we're not going to do them with frequency, kind of like ABRT.
Right. And Joe, the subcommittee that's been working on this, I think chaired by Paul Omi, right, has been working on this for a number of months, and this is in order to align with the TPP 2050 goals, and somewhat simplify or maybe create a regional solicitation process that's a little more direct to outcomes. Am I correct?
Yes, and more direct to the TPP. Now, these are officially recommended by the policymaker working group, but that's also informed by the technical group that Paul chairs.
Okay, very good. Any discussion questions about the recommended motion here? Lisa.
Thanks. This is kind of just a precursor statement for all my votes today. I don't know. I know some of you were at the policymaker work group meeting yesterday and TAB, and I'm a little bit nervous with these votes today, particularly because the policymaker work group spun a little bit on the community connections, which I know that comes up. That's not technically on the table here, but one of the things they stated was now whether or not the community connections or former, equity should be a standalone category or a measure across the board on all of these. TAB also did not weigh in on anything yesterday. They ran out of time. And so while I know the policymaker work group has blessed some of these things, we have not really heard where TAB is on anything. And some of this I feel like is coming into more of a policy discussion. And so without the technical folks having any understanding about where they're landing or any thoughts, I just want to make a blatant statement that I don't want the F&P vote today to be portrayed as, well, this is the technical perspective, because our technical perspective now hasn't had any kind of policy input, if that makes sense. So yeah, like I said, if TAB starts going in a different direction, I would hope that the votes come back to us, or at least for consideration, particularly if another category is added, or if the funding targets has a completely different discussion amongst the other votes today.
Thank you, Lisa. Good comment. I think part of the community scoring, if you will, across the board, and whether that that would be something that I would assume would come back for discussion and review with F&P. And if I'm incorrect, I would ask staff to correct me on that. But yes, I understand that, you know, we're really voting on a framework here, and maybe not necessarily from a ultimately ultra technical perspective, but I guess our duty is to advise whether these categories, you know, can work in a regional solicitation kind of setting, you know, whatever that outcome is, that final outcome is. So I would just encourage people to think about it in that fashion. Cole, go ahead.
Yeah, this is, and I apologize to Joe for not bringing this up ahead of time, but an area where there's been a significant amount of conversation is around, is ABRT an application category or not? I know that that's actually been a discussion this time around about, you know, the possibility to make it competitive, but I think the group agreed not to do that until we have other applicants that may want to access it. So in the future, it could be an application category, but I'm a little worried about categorizing it that way. We have other funding pots that we do that are not application based, like TBI and the TDM baseline funding. So I was just curious if others have thoughts on that. Like, is there value in saying that's not necessarily an application category, but it is a funding bucket of some sorts? And similarly, do we need to call out some of those other buckets that we know exist? And I think they're on the slide that shows, you know, the TBI at the bottom. So it's part of the bigger structure, but they're not application categories, so to speak.
I'm not sure. Cole, did you want Joe to speak on that?
No, I think the rest of the group, but curious
Okay.
to hear their thoughts.
Perfect. Lisa?
Yeah, Cole, from my memory of where at least the technical, and once again, Tab hasn't weighed in on this, but where the policymaker work group went was that in the past, from my understanding, Metro Transit submitted basically a letter stating their intent on this, but that the request now is that they actually fill out the application so the data exists, particularly for some of the greenhouse gas components. And that with an understanding that right now Metro Transit's the only entity that has projects that would be put forward. So I think because we're asking them to actually fill out a quote unquote application, from my memory of where they landed, that it would be an application category. But I think generally with the expectation that there's going to be only one in here unless one of the suburban providers gets to a point where they have arterial projects that they would submit.
Good point, Lisa. I recall that discussion as well. Joe?
Thanks, Chair. I would say that this is a framework of sorts, and we've usually considered the IBRT as a category, even though, to Cole's point, it wasn't a application category. Maybe this would be solved if the word funding category is used instead of application category. But while I'll acknowledge the inconsistency that we're not naming TBI, I don't necessarily think that this implies competitive in this context. But we can also, I mean, if people want to make a motion that would clarify, we can do that, and we can also clarify in the action to tab. But I think this is like this is a framework we've been using for quite some time. So that's what led us here anyway, without adding a number 13 for TBI or an asterisk for ABRT.
All right. Paul?
Thanks, Mr.
And I
Chair.
believe. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think Joe's right. I mean, that's, I think from the policymaker's perspective that the ABRT would be included in the application category, but in shown, and they would have to still fill out an application. So technically, you know, it's still a category, is my understanding. So I feel comfortable moving forward with that as a category. Number 11, electrical vehicle charging infrastructure. It's my understanding that category is just, we're setting aside funding, is my understanding, for 2026 to be used in the next solicitation, 2028 or so. So really that one's, there is not a application category for that. We're just setting aside money. So maybe that's just a caveat that we should note.
Thanks, Paul. Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. Heidi, I represent STA. I know that some members on STA are concerned about that it's loosely an application process. They want to make sure that there's ridership predictions included in that ABRT, something that they can go back and refer to once lines are open. And so wondering if that's something that would be revisited to actually go through an application process similar to transit expansion that other transit providers have to go through.
Yeah, and Lisa asks, and Heidi, maybe you can answer this. What's STA?
Yep, so that's Suburban Transit Association. So it consists of the 4 suburban transit providers.
Thank you.
So, Chair, there are a few people in the process that might know if I'm not quite stating this right, but I believe the application part of ABRT is about capturing data for the performance measures more than it is about setting up for a competition. But we do have an eye in the future if there future conditions if there could be a competition. But we are asking for application data primarily for performance measures and before and after statistics going into the solicitation. So that's why we do have an application for that and would ask for a number of items to be filled out.
So Joe, maybe to clarify, are these all, I mean, are there some, would you classify these all as application categories, but some as competitive and some as non-competitive?
Chair, I'll be honest, you're getting into nuance that I hadn't thought much of, but I guess that's true. I mean, which you could pick the word application out of and change the funding, I suppose, federal funding categories. But yeah, so right now it doesn't look like ABRT is going to be competitive, at least not this cycle, but that door could be open in the future. So yeah, these are the primary funding categories. There's a bit of nuance difference with a couple of these in terms of whether they're traditional scoring categories or not, I suppose.
All right, Cole.
Yeah, Chair, you actually just hit on the point I was going to make, and this is going to become more relevant later this month when some information comes out from an audit that internally that the Met Council had done, that there's very clearly interpretation by external partners that application means competitive. And so I really think we as a board need to be more clear about which projects are being scored and ranked versus which ones have a separate process for identifying the priorities. And that's why I think that there are certain buckets that we do to the regional solicitation that don't go through a scored and ranked application process. And so that would be TBI, TDM based funding, and ABRT. Right now, that doesn't mean that couldn't change in the future, but that might be helpful from a clarity perspective for us to think about being more transparent with the public about that rather than implying this is competitive as I think it is interpreted today. And I totally agree that the statement about we're going to collect information about ABRT is true. There is not currently an application being developed for the ABRT funding request. We're going to be collecting information, but we're not developing like a similar application to the rest of the categories.
So I think, Cole, I think what you're saying, and I think what part of the discussion is about is maybe one of the few technical aspects of this recommended motion. And I'm just curious if staff's perspective might be that, you know, Joe kind of alluded to this and maybe we, you know, is it sufficient to make the motion that there's 12 federal funding categories and leave off the word application in this motion so that it provides more clarity in that regard?
Sure, I think the question would be whether that's sufficient to the point we're trying to make. I mean, that gets the word application out of there, but Cole might have more than that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. This is Lisa.
Go ahead, Lisa.
You know, to Cole's point there, if that is something that is important clarity for Met Council based on audit, upcoming audit results,
then we may, like, what's the actual point of this motion? Is the point to tell Tab and set forth what the actual applications are? Then if that's the case, then yes, maybe we do get rid of arterial best rapid transit if there's actually not going to be an application. Because I'd also like to state that the new interchanges, generally the assumption is that one of them is going in each year that's kind of handpicked, agreed upon based on, you know, what's actually going to be feasible to do. So is that, you know, that's kind of been talked about too as part of the bus rapid transit is almost a set aside, although there is an application for that. So, but with that said, is there either, I think there's two ways to do it. One, to get at what Cole's saying, remove the arterial VRT, and this is about the actual applications in which we're developing an application, or is there another way to do this where it's showing two buckets, where there's application and then there's the other funding things, I don't know what word we'd use, and that's the TBI, the TDM, is that what the other one was, Cole, and the BRT?
Yeah, we call it the base level TDM, and that has been called out in past solicitations as part of the TDM category. But I think exactly what you're saying, Lisa, I'm more like recognizing that there's application categories versus like other project selection processes. I'm not terribly concerned about handling this in this action. You know, it could be part of our public comment, you know, response, but I just think at some point we need to be more clear about that, and this might make more sense after the audit report that comes out later this month. So we could also defer this to TAC if folks want to just move this as presented today.
Joe?
Hey, thanks, Chair. Looking at the two options Lisa presented, along with Cole's idea of just kind of moving on and tweaking it later, I just want to make sure that something should happen that ABRT and TDM and TBI, well, TBI is not here now, I suppose, but ABRT should be in there because TAB needs to know that it's still something that we're doing. If it's not in there, they might think that it's gone, and that's not the intent of this. So I think whether, you know, when we get, maybe if it's down the road and we have to reclassify, restate some of these things, I think we have to make sure that that is something that emotions recognized through the process, so TAB will know, oh yeah, we're including this ABRT category, however you want to label it.
Thank you. Any other discussion or consideration of the motion? Or, you know, staff recommended motion?
I mean, not to make this further complicated, but does TAB need to, you know, if we're doing maximum and minimums, do we need to talk about, you know, the maximum we'd set aside for TBI and the TDM too? So they know where all their money is going relative to the rest of the program. I know that's not in a future motion.
Cole?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I do think that that's important, Alyssa, and that's some of that is established in separate actions. We have done complete actions dedicated to the 10-year TBI program, but I think for today, Mr. Chair, this is what my recommended motion would be, is that we move forward with recommending the funding application categories listed here, but direct staff to provide more clarity about competitive versus non-competitive and propose something for TAC that, you know, recognize the discussion that we had today and then just propose some changes that don't remove anything from this list, but just provide more clarity between those two types of funding categories, if you will. Does that make sense?
Let me try to summarize. So basically the recommended motion that's presented with some direction to staff to help clarify the nature of, you know, either application or allocation.
Yeah, and just maybe prepare some an approach for TAC to consider and discuss in more detail.
All right. Would anybody support that motion enough to try their hand at phrasing that?
This is Lissa. I guess I'll make a motion to recommend the 12 items here as general application categories with the recommendation when TAC considers this. There are also the other funding buckets shown as part of this motion, so there's full awareness of where the funds are going.
Okay.
Is that kind of succinct?
I'll ask staff to maybe interpret that just a bit. And
yeah, Chair, if Lissa or I don't know if Cole wants to take a stab at synthesizing that just for note-taking purposes here, so I know what we're actually, I can put it up on screen so all members can know what they're voting on.
I'm not going to try to write that perfectly in the meeting, personally.
Lissa, would your motion be consistent with the recommended motion with that, kind of appending on the staff direction to provide additional clarity?
Yeah, honestly, now that I think through this, yeah, I think the recommended motion is what's on the table, and then it's just, via the conversation, direct, staff maybe clean up how this is presented and include at least information about the other funding buckets. So it's clearer for TAC and for TAB in the future. But I think, generally the motion is this. That's honestly on the slide is probably just the easiest way to do it.
Okay. There anybody to second that?
Mr. Chair, I'll second.
Thanks, Paul. Any other discussion? Is everybody clear? Well, hopefully, if anybody's unclear about what that motion is, please state so. We'll try to clarify it one more time.
Chair, this is OJ from Anoka County. Is there going to be any clarification for which is competitive and which is non-competitive categories as part of the motion?
I don't think we're asking. I don't think the motion goes into that specificity. It's just acknowledge. I think the motion understands that there are categories that have different, competitive natures, competitive or non-competitive natures. So I would say no.
Thanks.
Sure. Other comments, questions? If not, I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County OJ.
Aye.
Carver County Flommer.
Aye.
Dakota County Chapik. Hennepin County Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County Roggenbuck. Scott County Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County Leitner.
Aye.
Egan Mathis. Eden Prairie Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit Janawiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit Shoal.
Aye.
DNR Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro District Tag. MPCA AO.
Aye.
MnDOT State Aid Brown.
Aye.
Met Council MTS Hineker.
Aye.
Tab Coordinator Kotsukos.
Aye.
Chair, the motion at 19 ayes.
Thank you, Robbie, and thanks, especially Lissa and Cole and staff for kind of working through that a little bit. I do think it's good to provide some additional clarity in the long run. So next item is 2025-32, 2026 active transportation solicitation funding application categories.
All right, I'll be taking this one, so one Joe to the next.
Yeah.
So hopefully mine will be
Thanks,
a little, mine will be a little more straightforward, I think. For this one, we wanted to have separate action items for both the regional solicitation, which is federally funded, and our active transportation solicitation, which will be locally funded through the regional sales tax. One of the things we heard initially from the policymakers in our active transportation working group, which is made up of policymakers and technical staff as well, is to really want to clearly separate the federal funding from the local regional sales tax funding. You know, they have different requirements, they're going to have different considerations, different scoring, right, from those legislative requirements. And so one of the first questions was, how do we separate those two pots of funds very distinctly and clearly? And the group eventually got to the recommendation to recommend splitting these by project category. So you see here local bike facilities, which will be covering essentially any bike focused projects in the region that are locally originated. Then local pedestrian facilities, so that category that was previously federally funded will now be funded through this regional sales tax. And then also through discussions with the work group, they also wanted to add an active transportation planning category to support planning in the region. One of the requirements of these funds through the state legislature is to have a plan in place. So the projects selected need to be considered in a plan before they're selected. And so one of the things we want to be sure that our local partners can apply for these funds is that they have opportunities to do that planning. And so we wanted to create an active transportation planning category as well. All these are competitive. They all are application categories, so that shouldn't be an issue here. But yeah, if there's any questions, I would certainly take them before we go to roll call.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions or comments on the item here and the recommended motion? I don't think we have the layer of complexity that we might have with the prior item.
Tried to spell that one out, so hopefully that was easy. Yeah.
Yeah. If no discussion, I'd entertain a motion following staff's recommendation or otherwise.
Yep. Drew Flommer will make a motion.
Thanks, Drew. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, I'll second it, Paul. Only.
Thanks, Paul. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Anoka County OJ.
Aye.
Carver County Flommer.
Aye.
Hennepin County Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County Roggenbuck. Scott County Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County Leitner.
Aye.
Eden Prairie Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit Janawiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit Shoal.
Aye.
DNR Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT State Aid Brown.
Aye.
MPCA AO.
Aye.
MTS Hiddeker.
Aye.
Tab Coordinator Kotsukos.
Aye.
Chair of the motion at 19 ayes.
Thank you, Robbie. Next item of business is 2025-33, and this is the 2026 Regional Solicitation Minimum and Maximum Federal Awards. So we're back to Joe Barbo.
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah, this is another recommendation from the policymaker work group. So shown in the table 1 in the action transmittal, as well as the table on the slide shown on your screen. We have maximum and minimum federal funding awards as recommended by the policymaking work group through the regional solicitation evaluation process. Most of the proposed awards match or are a bit higher than the 2024 maximums, which, as you can see, are also shown here. There are, though, of course, a few new categories that don't really have a 2024 baseline, like EV charging infrastructure and the two safety categories. The safety categories, having that minimum and maximum range of 2 to 7 million, are meant to sort of be larger projects than the traditional HSIP category that comes through MnDOT. Those have a $2 million maximum, so that's why you're seeing a range just above that here. Most of these other items are small changes from last time, or no changes from last time. But we do have the ABRT. There was a fairly extensive discussion at the policymaker work group on what was at the time proposed as a $30 million maximum. So here where it says NA, it actually had said 30 million and NA for the minimum. There was talk about a $35 million maximum. That made some folks uncomfortable. The $30 million being moved from maximum to minimum with no maximum is meant to reflect the possibility that maybe we don't get a lot of transit applications, and to provide a little bit of flexibility in case there's transit funding that is available to put towards bus arterial BRT. But most likely, if we get a good group of projects that folks like and want to fund, that probably won't happen. So that $30 million would probably be in play. But at this point, that would be impossible to actually speculate on. Another piece is the interchange projects, which is a new funding category, and that has a $20 million maximum award proposed by the policymaker work group, and to address the high cost of interchange projects. The $10 million maximum from 2024 in that row reflects strategic capacity, which is where these projects would have been funded last time around. So this is the first time that they've been their own category. We could have put NA in the interchange, but we put 10 million because that's as much as an interchange should have gotten in 2024. A lot of the rest of the stuff is not outrageously different from what we've known in the past. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Thanks, Joe. I'll open it for discussion. Questions or comments on this recommended motion? Lisa.
I know this is the direction from that policymaker work group. This is really where I wish Tab would have weighed in on this arterial BRT. Having no maximum leaves me, and I will say I'm not in a transit agency. I'm not the ones that would be applying for these categories, but this makes me extremely uncomfortable that Tab then could basically decide they don't like the other transit expansion or customer experience projects or don't think they're valid. And so then they would give the arterial BRT project more money. These things cannot be compared apples to apples. That is why they're in different categories. And while Tab, I think, generally knows they shouldn't compare scores to each other, they always do. I think the arterial BRT has to have a max. I think this really disadvantages the other transit entities applying for this when there then could be money taken out of their bucket to then drive up how much the max is on the arterial BRT. I know we're still working in with a range, but I really don't like this as a standard practice.
Okay. Other discussion on the, I guess, the ABRT match? And Heidi, I'm not sure. Feel free to chime in if that's what your comment might be about.
I don't even need to repeat what she just said. Agreed 1,000%.
Okay. Other comments on let's focus on the ABRT, maximum. Does staff want to comment on that any further?
Chair, I think the rationale was not ever that Tab is likely to take all the $60 million of transit we have and give it to ABRT. And I think it was more, what if we don't get a lot of applications, or what if we don't get a lot of quality applications? And that is one thing Tab struggles with, is they view raw scores as of questionable quality, even if they're not. But so I don't think there was intent to. I think there's intent to use that for flexibility in case something comes up, something unsuspected happens. But folks might not be comfortable with me saying I don't think it's a likely occurrence if we get a lot of applications, but that's what I believe the intent was. But others who were at those meetings could maybe articulate that better, or maybe tell me I'm wrong.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe is right. It's more about making sure that we keep transit whole and having places to go if we don't get enough applicants, but also what was discussed is if Metro Transit has one of the maybe like projects towards the bottom of the list and wants to say we'd rather put that towards ABRT, it would give them that flexibility. So I think the policymaker work group is looking for flexibility here. And while I understand Lisa's point, I think at this point, all we have to go on is that direction. And we don't have anything. I mean, TAB can vote it down when they review it, but I think that's the direction we've been given from the policymaker work group at this point.
Lisa?
Two things. One's a question. Have we typically been in a position where there hasn't been enough transit applications to fill the bucket or meet the target for transit? Or is this kind of a pie in the sky scenario? Once again, I trust that any public entity that's putting a project forward, whether it scores high or low, is of value to them. And I'm really against the thought process of putting more money in a bucket. The other piece, Washington County doesn't get to say, hey, we had 2 trail projects and one got funded and the other one is towards the bottom. Can you just put that money towards the one project, please, instead of funding both? No other entity gets to do that. And so Metro Transit should not be able to get to do that, to say, hey, we're putting this, a project in customer experience. We'd rather, we see that's funded. We'd rather you not fund that and put it towards RTO or BRT. No other public entity gets to do that. And I don't think it should be a precedent we're setting here.
Elaine, did you want to respond to that? Yeah.
Yeah. So historically, we've received enough transit applications, more than the amount that was set aside for the ranges. And that's even with 25 million set aside for the RTO and BRT. And so adding another 30 million is going to reduce the amount for spreading on transit. Plus, we are recommending, or the group is going to be voting on increasing the maximum request. So even the amount that could be assigned to projects could be even up to 10 million versus the 7 million in the past. So there should not be any interaction or possibility of not having enough applications. And I also want to add in, even if TAB sets the 25 million or 30 million, and before they had 25 million, they always do have that option of being flexible with their own funding. Because what we have is one tab setting the limits and then a future tab actually selecting the projects and ordering the amounts. We've had them go outside the ranges that they've set up. And again, they always look at them as guidance. And that could be something maybe that tab would consider this as 30 million with guidance of, if needed, they could look at changing the funding that they add to it in the future.
Okay, thanks. Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. Just so I'm reading this correctly, you're saying that the BRT category does not have a max. It's not saying that if there's additional dollars that could roll over to transit expansion or transit customer experience. Is that correct?
Joe, do you want to respond to that? Or
Sure, I believe that's correct. I might need clarification, but yeah, it doesn't imply that that a transit expansion or customer experience could get more than 10 million, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so really it's only keeping the transit dollars in BRT, not in the 2 other categories. Is that correct?
You could say that. Another way to phrase it is to make sure that you're keeping transit funding in transit. If, to Elaine's point, we have always had enough money to not have to worry about that. We've come close a couple of times. We funded the bottom once and missed the bottom one once at the same time. But so that, it might be an extreme case, but if that in theory you could be moving transit funding to something else if you're stuck with a $30 million maximum, or I think 35 was talked about at some of the meetings, and then for whatever reason we don't get a lot of applications. To Elaine's point, we have a $10 million maximum now. I don't want to too hard speculate on how that might how that might go, but we probably will get enough applications. That said, I think it's kind of a guard against having to move the money to some other mode. I'd rather somebody that actually came up with this idea talk about it than myself, but that's how I interpreted it.
Okay.
I'm gonna say maybe a way to word that is, if you do not get enough transit applications, that funding could be shifted to ABRT. Not that you would not fund some and have them take, we're just taking it away from another project, but if there are not enough applications in the transit categories, that the money would go to ABRT instead of going to safety or roadway or something like that.
Scott, I think you're next.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just on that point, I'm looking at the narrative of the business item, and what Elaine just explained, I think captures my understanding of how this would operate. So I just wanted to point that out, that there's kind of an if-then situation. It's not a no max applied and it is immediately eligible for a $40 million request. My understanding is it's $30 million, and then if events unfold in the other transit categories, it is possible, up to the discretion of TAB, to increase ABRT funding. So I just wanted to say that as it's written in the business item is my understanding of how it would operate. And then secondly, just wanted to generally say that I have the same thinking that various people have shared here in terms of, I think at a high level, an objective is to keep transit modal dollars within transit. I think is a goal that I'm seeing here as well. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it in, I guess I would just put this thought out there. Is it the lesser of, I think Alyssa alludes to, that the comfort level with this, and perhaps the committee recommended this method versus, listing a higher max that might be all encompassing of transit funding in order to capture that. And we're dealing with a way in which it's presented, right? Maybe this table is no longer, maybe it's not sufficient, or, the right framework for the ABRT, minimum and maximum listing. Maybe there's more to it than that. So, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm just concerned we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. If we have not been in a position in which there weren't enough projects to fund, then why is this the solution to a problem that's never happened before? And I don't disagree. Yes, we want to keep the transit bucket in the transit bucket. And if this is the way the committee feels like is the way to do that, but then why aren't we also doing that, say, for the, bike ped, et cetera? That's my concern, is that this is a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. And once again, then is potentially a way for money to get moved around outside of kind of what the original intent was. But once again, if there's the votes for this, that's fine. I can go along with it. It just seems like a very odd thing to put forward.
Okay. And I think Heidi had a comment in the chat.
Elaine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this happened in 2024.
Elaine, do you recall?
Actually, I think we funded it all but one project in 2024.
It was
Something was,
something similar, but yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we
Something
were
was-
pretty close.
something was ineligible because of one of the other rules, and we had to skip it. But I think so. Therefore, we ended up funding to the bottom.
Yeah. I think we funded all but one.
Okay. Well, with all that discussion, I think the recommended motion's still on the table. I'm not sure if there's anybody that's willing to support that motion. I would encourage us to move this along. I think it's the table itself may not be the whole story, but it does signify that there's nuance here, and so perhaps there's ultimately a more rigorous way of explaining that. But at this point, I think our understanding is that the transit funding would stay in transit, and that the ABRT should a situation arise where funding is not utilized in the other categories, that the ABRT would take those on, and therefore the maximum cannot be determined, and therefore the NA. Cole?
I was just going to move the recommended motion. I think Tab will have a chance to comment and weigh in on it, but this is the best information that we have right now. So move the recommended motion.
Thanks, Cole. Joe?
Sure. I don't know if this is the time to do that now that we've had a motion and no second, but I would just state we had, between the two other transit categories last time, we had 9 applications. We funded 8.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Is there a second to Cole's motion?
Chair, this is Robert Ellis. I'll second.
Thanks, Robert. Any more discussion on this? If not, Robbie, I'll ask you to call the roll. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County, OJ.
Aye.
Carver County, Flommer.
Aye.
Hennepin County, Buell.
Aye.
Dakota County. Ramsey County. Scott County, Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County, Lightner.
Aye.
Egan. Eden Prairie, Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville, Almy.
Aye.
Minneapolis, Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth, Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul, Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit, Janawiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit, Scholl.
Aye.
DNR, Spooner, Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped, McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro. MnDOT State Aid, Brown.
Aye.
MPCA, AO.
Aye.
Met Council, MTS, Henniker.
Aye.
Tab Coordinator, Kutsukos.
Aye.
Chair, the vote had 19 ayes.
Thanks, Robbie. So the next item is back to Joe Whiting, and it is 2025-34, 2026 active transportation minimum and maximum awards.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm back. So next we're moving on to our active transportation minimum maximum awards. So I'll talk about these kind of category by category, but the thinking was into these, and then I'll note that these all did receive recommendations from the active transportation work group as well. So in the local bike facilities category, as you see here, that 5.5 max is actually connected to that regional multi-use trail category from the 2024 solicitation. So thinking was for the local bike facilities category to lower that max to 3.5 to get, for one thing, to better differentiate the types of projects we're expecting in this category potentially. And also to actually reflect what we heard from our last solicitation was actually the technical members recommended that 3.5 and the policymakers bumped it up to 5.5. And so we're kind of matching that old technical recommendation. Another consideration in this one was in the 24 cycle about the average request award amount for the regional bicycle facility category was about 3.6, so that 3.5 is right around there. And then you also see a pretty small minimum here at 150,000. So that is something that the policymakers actually recommended we drop that a little further down here to give that bike facility category a really big spread to allow for small projects up to pretty big projects in that local category to kind of give a lot of nuance again to those local partners and what kind of projects they want to apply for funding. On the pedestrian facility side, you'll see a similar dynamic here. That small minimum, again, that same thinking was by the policymakers to lower that again to a smaller amount to allow for some smaller projects to apply for funding. That 2.5 million is a little bit higher than what we had in the 24 solicitation of 2 million for pedestrian facilities. We really wanted to up this a little bit here to account for inflation and also to account for the fact that the 24 cycle, we saw more than half of the projects that came in actually requesting that maximum 2 million. So it seemed appropriate to bump that up a little bit for the 26 solicitation. Then finally, with the planning category, so as we're aware, we have not had a planning category before, so we don't have anything for 24. However, we wanted to allow for, again, a good mix of different types of planning projects to be, feel like they're eligible to be applying for here. So we have no minimum. So I think one of the things we're expecting to see in this 26 solicitation is comprehensive planning support coming through to help communities develop their pedestrian and bicycle elements of those plans. And so those potentially could be smaller dollar amounts, supplementing larger contracts. And so we wanted to be able to have a little flexibility there so that no max there is really looking to account for smaller planning projects up to that 200,000 where you might see your larger dedicated active transportation plans or things like that. And as I mentioned, again, these did receive a recommendation from the AT working group. And with that said, I will open to any discussion.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. And I think that, the minimums reflect the maybe streamlined process, if you will, of project delivery with these funds, not having to go through all the federal processes. So questions, comments on this motion? Jerry OJ.
Thanks, Chair. Quick question. Are these state funds or are these federal funds?
Chair and committee, this is either actually, so this is part of the 2023 legislative session, which enacted an additional sales tax in the region, and a portion of that tax is going directly to TAB to be then distributed for specifically active transportation projects. So that's where these funds are coming from. So this is something that will be distributed by TAB and actually administered internally at the council.
We call it local sales tax.
Yeah.
Local sales tax. But are they going to have, Chair, are they going to have federal funds? I mean, so is this going to be like a federal process where you have to do the federal requirements to deliver these types of projects, or is it a state funded or local funding projects more following the state aid rules?
And Jerry, I'll let Joe answer that fully, but yes, it is more of a state and local process. I think Met Council is going to administer that process. Am I correct, Joe?
Yeah, Chair and committee members, I'll just follow up that. Yeah, this is part of this is that we'll be administering this, so it'll follow a process as we set it up. But we're kind of looking at it to set it up similar to how MnDOT has their own active transportation process, which they distribute small grants for communities as well. So I'll note that these funds will be available once the project is awarded. So we actually did a pilot of these projects for the 24 solicitation. We selected 17 of the pen bike projects then, and one of them was actually completed this year. So these funds will be available immediately, and we won't necessarily need to follow that more rigorous federal process. So hopefully the idea of these funds is they're easier to get for smaller communities and also then to actually deliver projects in a quicker pace.
Okay, thank you.
Emily.
Thanks, Chair. I know that we touched on the minimums a little bit, but I was just wondering, maybe Joe, if you could provide a little bit more background on how those were set. One thing that just stood out to me is that we sometimes will have small cities request funding for like smaller scale pedestrian projects, and I think those would from time to time be under that minimum cost that's shown on the slide. So I was just hoping to learn a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair and committee members. So the minimum we going through deliberations, I think we thought 150,000 was low enough to potentially get kind of those smaller small projects, but I guess I'd certainly be willing to hear more about how small potentially some of the projects you're seeing are coming in. Having delivered projects on the other side myself, I can't remember a project smaller than 150,000, but I'm sure they're out there.
So I might just add, the minimum was discussed a little bit relative to like the staff capacity. If we get too many small applications, we could have upwards of 50 grants that we have to administer. So we wanted to try to keep a limit on the number of applications we get.
Yeah, thanks, Cole. That's a good point. And I'll also note too that these would be competitively scored as well. So that would be capacity on our technical partners as well who are scoring these. So we'll see in that what the target looks like for next year and the next item. And so if we potentially got a 50, 60, 70 very small projects, that may be difficult for us to both administer and for technical partners to score and review. So that's a good point. Thanks, Cole.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do think that the group discussed quite at some length evaluation after the first cycle of this process. It's a new process, a new, new maximum, new minimums, new, funding, types. And so I think there was a lot of, it being new, there's very limited information to go off of the 2024 projects, even, very few of those are complete. And, just due to the nature of delivery. And so I think the group recognized that there's evaluation that needs to happen, before the next cycle comes through. So Drew, go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Also kind of a methodology question. When we're talking about, I think you said that the historic average for bike facilities or the previous average was about 3.6. And I was wondering if that was an average or a midpoint and what kind of outliers there might have been. I'm a little hesitant to drop it below a 2-year-old average. Nothing is getting cheaper to build. But
Chair and committee members, so so it was an average and not a midpoint. It was taking the full request and dividing by the number of projects. And I'll note tier 2 that our federal category still is 5.5, and that will be additional funding available for this, and likely around, I think, 30 to 35 million. So what we're really trying to do here too is provide 2 different sources of potentially avenues for applying for funds.
So ideally, like smaller projects end up with the local money, and the big stuff can go federal.
Correct, and kind of the deciding factor here will be, the regional category will be more connected to those regional trails, RBTN facilities, whereas this is more kind of open to all types of facilities.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Great, good explanation. Joe Barbeau, you had your hand up for a second. Did you have a comment?
Chair Joe Whiting got that taken care of for me.
Okay, thanks. Other comments, questions? If not, I'll entertain the motion presented by staff. Anybody like to make that? Or an alternate motion?
Mr. Chair, this is Paul. I'll move the item as printed.
Thank you, Paul.
This is Drew. I'll second that.
Thanks, Drew. Any other discussion? If not, I'll ask Robbie to call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County OJ.
Aye.
Carver County Flommer.
Aye.
Dakota County. Hennepin County Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County. Scott County Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County Leitner.
Aye.
Eden Prairie Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit Jenowiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit Scholl.
Aye.
DNR Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro District. MnDOT State Aid Brown.
Aye.
MPCA AO.
Aye.
Met Council MTS Henniker.
Aye.
Tab Coordinator Kutsukos.
Aye.
For the motion, voted 19 ayes.
All right, great. Thanks, Robbie. Got a couple more items. The next one is 2025-35, 2026 regional solicitation modal funding targets. And back to Joe Barbeau.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this one, the motion, we just pretty much write this out and don't show much else, so I might even just drag this over. So this is the what we'll kind of call the modal funding target options, where you'll see here that we've divided this into 5 groupings. So we have safety, is the 2 safety categories for 12%. And this is recommendations, again, from the policy work group. So the policy work group recommends 12% to safety, 14% to bike ped. Well, it's got 15 here. I should do, so somebody do the math for me. 24% to transit, 44% to roadways, and 6% to environment. And so this is based, pretty well on the past spread of funding. Safety and environment are new, and the rationale was to put most of the safety funding coming from roadway projects, because most of them will be roadway projects. Somebody correct me. Well, here we go. We assume the numbers here, the amounts assume $250 million federally, but it's really the percentages that are the targets available for 2020, 2030, and 2031. And then the Metro District Competitive HIP funding is approximately $30 million. That's not included in here. This $30 million here is our safety categories. And then active transportation funding is generated by the regional sales tax and therefore is not included in this discussion either. That's going to be the next item. So $25 million of the $30 million target for safety comes from roadways, since that's really where most of the projects will be, with $5 million coming from the bike ped, the former bike ped modal area, now just bikes. So with that, I would stand for questions about how this division occurred.
And Joe, I double checked the bike ped. I think the 14% is correct, according to my math, and it might just be a typo in the recommended action up there. So
okay, we'll fix that to 14.
Yeah, so are there I don't know if you want to bring the motion back up, Joe, here in a second. I'm wondering if there's comments, questions related to the presentation or the motion. I would recommend that any motion is made with the edit to 14%, which seems to be correct. Any discussion? Alyssa.
Yeah, this one is in particular, I'm uncomfortable with. I mean, I'll go with the group here today, but the technical steering committee hasn't really weighed in a ton on this, tabbed in it yesterday. So I think this is an okay line in the sand, but I'm feeling like we're not being fully kind of informed here on the other groups that are involved in this to make this decision.
All right. Other comments? I would say that there's a substantial change between funding ranges and funding targets too, that, is accompanied here. That's more or less intentional. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, Joe.
No, I don't know that I'm able to speak to that. We did have more ranges in the past, and I know that sometimes those ranges would be what looks like a lot of money, but it would be like 1 or maybe 2 projects. So I think the idea was to simplify here, but I don't know if Steve Peterson's online. I know he went to a dead spot in Wisconsin on his way to Chicago or whatever, or if Cole knows, but I don't think, I don't know exactly what the decision was to go from ranges to targets, but I do know that the ranges got complex with very little movement would really impact whether something falls in a range or not.
Right. Okay. Cole?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I think Lydia can also chime in from the consultant side, but largely the reason was TAB wanted the flexibility of ranges, but they wanted to provide that level of expectation to applicants. So the target seemed like the compromise there to say it doesn't lock us into the ranges that maybe hampered their ability to make decisions, but it gave a strong expectation to applicants as to where they intend to fund projects. Lisa, do you want to add anything to that? Or sorry, Lydia.
No, I think that's essentially correct. What we heard from the technical steering committee who did weigh in on these was that technical folks were really looking for that a little bit of certainty in terms of like when you put in a safety application, approximately how much funding is going to be available. So we kind of vetted a couple different options and the targets kind of that provide the flexibility, but without putting official ranges on there, it ended up being kind of preferred by most people.
Thank you. And I think one of the things this also does with the targets, at least, is, you know, and important to have those numbers just from the standpoint of public comment and, you know, transparency as far as where the funding is generally going or intended to go. So, Innocent?
Yes, I'm just curious why the environment is so low at 6%. Was this from policy group, or it's just some type of agreement between the technical staff?
Yeah, I'll let maybe Joe, you want to speak to that?
Chair, this is this was from the policy working group, and having this environment, and particularly the EV charging is new to us. So I think there's a little bit of hesitancy to put a lot of resources into that. Maybe either Cole or Lydia has better insight than I do, but that is a policy working group recommendation, and we are so used to having roadway, transit, and bike ped that I think those items are still taking up the lion's share of the funding. And then safety, of course, has been really hit hard in our topics and our discussions over the last couple of years. So, but yeah, I think it's because it's new and because we're not necessarily seeing a lot of demand for the two categories in there. We're not sure.
Elaine?
Part of it too, this is funding that's going to be set aside. The application for this category is for the EV charging stations. And I think part of it's dependent on federal funding coming through. I think what we had planned to use for that is frozen at this moment. I'm not speaking 100% for sure on that. But again, this is setting aside money for the next solicitation with the expectation of how many applications we'd see coming in for that category.
So that could be changed based on maybe the future application that you receive?
The application for that will not be released or opened for applications this round. It's setting this funding aside, so it'll be 2030, 2031 funding that will be available to be applied for in 2028. Because selecting those projects would probably have a quicker turnaround to implement them when you select them in 28 and having those locations. And at that time, if there was additional federal funding that came through in the next transportation bill, we could always have tab fund or more projects at that time too that could take earlier funding. I mean, that's the unknown is the funding for next round too. I mean, everything we're discussing here is on the supposition that a similar amount of funding is going to be available in 2030 and 2031.
Right.
Thank you.
Does that help, Innocent? Cole?
For the sake of time, if Innocent's good, I'll just move on.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, quick question. Are we voting on the percentages or the dollar amounts in terms of the target?
My understanding is it's the percentages.
Gotcha.
Chair, that's correct. The percentages, because the funding amounts are really hard to pin down this far in advance. Like how much total funding we're going to have.
Chair, and this is Michael, if I could jump in here.
Go ahead.
I think it's important we don't get too fixated on the exact percentages. In roadways, transit, bike and ped, there's elements of safety. There's probably environmental aspects in every other category that's not called an environment here. So I think it's important to just, if we're talking to the public about that, to make sure it's clear that, roadways, just because it doesn't have safety, doesn't mean we're not improving safety on the corridor, for example. But with that, I'd make a motion to move ahead with this.
And Michael, would you entertain just correcting that bike pedestrian amount so that it works out in your motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah, I was going to second, Chair. This is Hineker.
Okay. Thanks, Cole. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Robbie, roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County OJ.
Aye.
Carver County Flommer.
Aye.
Dakota County. Hennepin County Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County. Scott County Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County Leitner.
Aye.
Egan. Eden Prairie Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit Jenna Wiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit Scholl.
Aye.
DNR Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro District. MnDOT State Aid Brown.
Aye.
MPCA AO.
No.
I didn't register your vote. MPCA AO. Could you say again?
I said no.
Okay. Met Council MTS Hineker.
Aye.
Tab Coordinator Kotsukos.
Aye.
Chair, the motion had 18 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you, Robbie. Last item, action item for business today is 2025-36, and it is the 2026 active transportation funding targets. And Joe, back to Joe Whiting.
I'm back. So this one might not actually be a little more straightforward. So I'm going to give a little more background on this target here. So this item received quite a bit of discussion at the work group level. This is the recommendation from the work group, but how this one was really formulated and thought of is, so the difference between this funding and our federal funding is with active transportation, because it's a portion of that regional sales tax, it actually accrues in our account by the month. And so this is money that we actually have available now and not something we're projecting for future years. So the thinking here on the main discussion with the work group is really if we wanted to be targeting funding levels that we'll have kind of in the bank in 2026, or looking at future years to project funding to have a larger potential solicitation amount. The work group, after discussion, decided that that 50 million amount here is really about what we're expecting to have in the bank by the end of 2026, so available for projects as they are selected at the end of 26. So this 50 million represents that, plus a little bit of a reserve funding. So we're anticipating about to have to 52.5 million available in 26, but we're going to set aside about 5% of that for reserve funding, just for the sake of cash flow and things like that, to make sure that the counts aren't going to be overdrawn. So that 50 million is that target for the overall solicitation, which includes that local bike facilities category, that local pedestrian facilities, and the active transportation. Now within that, the work group did not want to set targets for the two infrastructure categories, that local pedestrian, local bike, because they wanted to retain flexibility as those applications come in next year to actually be awarding funds. However, as the planning funds will be significantly different, as there won't be infrastructure, there will be a sub-target. So within that $50 million of a $2 million for planning, so you can think of it as 48 million for those infrastructure categories and a target of 2 million for the planning categories. So again, and that target language is really to retain also flexibility, right? So if we get maybe a project that comes in at 51 million, right, we can go that way. If it comes at 49 million, right, we can go that way. So it's that 50 million is a target, again, setting those expectations for our local partners as they apply for projects, that there will be this much we're targeting to be available for the solicitation with a little flexibility built in. Then that sub target of 2 million for the planning specifically, again, with that little bit of flexibility built in with the target language rather than a more distinct number. So again, a little different than the federal, right? We're working with money we already have in the bank as opposed to looking out to the future. But yeah, so I'd open up to any discussion or questions on the target for active transportation.
Thanks, Joe. Are there any questions or comments regarding the presented items or the recommended motion? Cool.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it's probably important to note that, you know, after a year, maybe even waiting for 2 cycles, we might be able to establish bucket-based targets, but I think everyone was just not comfortable not having any history to do that, but just noting that that was definitely a consideration for the future after we get more history with this program.
Thanks, Cole. Appreciate that. Other comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a recommend if anybody supports the recommended motion.
Yep, this is Drew. I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Drew. Is there a second?
Yo, seconded.
Thanks, Innocent. So no further discussion. I'll ask Robbie to call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County OJ.
Aye.
Carver County Flommer.
Aye.
Dakota County. Hennepin County Buell.
Aye.
Ramsey County. Scott County Rudolph.
Aye.
Washington County Leitner.
Aye.
Egan. Eden Prairie Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Stewart.
Aye.
Plymouth Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering Weber.
Aye.
Metro Transit Janawiak.
Aye.
Urban Transit Shoal.
Aye.
DNR Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped McCormick.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro District. MnDOT State Aid Brown.
Aye.
MPCA AO.
Aye.
Met Council NTS Henniker.
Aye.
TAP Coordinator Kutsukos.
Aye.
Hear the motion at 19 ayes.
All right. Thank you very much, Robbie. And this last item on the agenda today is regional solicitation, HSIP, and active transportation updates. I'm not sure. Are we running close on time here? Got about 12 minutes.
Mhm.
Okay. Just want to mention too, before, just in case any of you have to drop off before this item's over, that staff plans to send out another request or survey request regarding next month's meeting and times and availability. So, good, Robbie, I guess you're going to lead this one.
Give this one to Joe and Lydia.
Great. Thank you.
Better known as Lydia.
Okay, I was going to say Joe and I have 2 separate presentations, so should I dive in first? And this
Yeah,
is,
thanks,
I will
Lydia.
note, yeah, and I'm leading this for Steve today. As noted, Steve is traveling, so I believe he's online, might weigh in if necessary, but otherwise I will note that, yes, as noted, we're running short on time. There's quite a bit in this presentation, so I'll kind of give the headlines and welcome discussion and additional questions if necessary. But the purpose of this presentation is to give a preview of action items that this group is going to see, I believe next month. As noted, this group went through several action items today. We do have kind of 2 rounds of action items as part of the regional solicitation evaluation. So in addition to the 3 that went through this week, at the next meeting, we're going to be asking you to approve qualifying requirements for the regional solicitation 2026, application criteria, measures, and scoring guidance, score weighting, and then approving the overall solicitation package, and then releasing it for to release for public comment. So just kind of as a quick overview of kind of a preview of what those action items will contain. There are a few, or one major new qualifying requirement, I would say, that we are proposing adding, and this relates to the MnDOT greenhouse gas impact assessment requirement, which I'm sure most of you are a little bit familiar with. I will note as well, every time this comes up, Molly McCartney from MnDOT is quick to note that there is a lot in flux here, and everyone is kind of trying to figure this out. But we are proposing a qualifying requirement that would allow Met Council to essentially own any VMT and greenhouse gas offsets generated by projects in order to balance out the program as required by the new MnDOT requirement. There have been a couple different options discussed that would give TAB a proportionate share based on the percentage of the project funding by region. I believe there is still a little bit in flux as to this requirement and a lot of discussion happening here. A couple other new qualifying requirements. We are proposing a new category, a new interchange projects application category. This requirement would fund projects that were identified as high priority in the intersection mobility and safety study. So just a qualifying requirement there. Those would be the only projects eligible for that category. And then the regional bicycle facilities, as I think Joe noted earlier, as part of the active transportation discussion, the regional bicycle facilities category, a qualifying requirement would be that any of those projects must be on the regional bicycle transportation network, the RBTN, or identified in the regional bike barrier study to be approved for that category. Again, local bicycle and pedestrian projects, we are proposing that those projects would be eligible to include costs for studies, preliminary engineering design, or construction engineering. You'll see that as an action item to kind of, that's an adjustment from previously when some of those costs had been excluded. And then a couple qualifying requirements for the active transportation planning category as well, which is brand new. The intent here is to fund projects that or plans that do not already exist or that are more than 10 years old. So the creation of a fully new active transportation plan. And then the intent also to address plans, to fund plans that address active transportation planning at a system level instead of a design for a single corridor or a single facility. So those are some of the major changes and adjustments to qualifying requirements. The criteria, measures, and scoring guidance is a big action item. We do not have all of that detail in here. It is in an appendix related to, or some detail of it is in an appendix related attached to this presentation. We are also going to be sending out updated application materials that includes all this information next week. So everyone will get a chance to review them then. But I'll just note some key changes. All of the criteria, measures, and scoring guidance that this group will be reviewing have been drafted with assistance from, over 100 plus people involved over the last several months at this point, undergoing second round of review by the technical groups, or will be undergoing second round of review, with the major goal of simplifying and tying everything back to the TPP goals. So that is a lens to kind of view all those criteria through. There is a proposed new community considerations criteria as well. I won't go through all of that. The community considerations is proposed to be about 20% of every application, and 3 specific measures relating to community data and context. So showing that the applicant understands their community and needs, community engagement. So how did the project, how is the project need identified through previous engagement? And then community benefits, understanding who is benefiting from this project and what those benefits are. There are several other considerations with the community considerations as well. Like I said, 20% of points across all application categories. Scoring using 5 different ratings and some training for scores. I'm not going to get into all of that right now because there's a lot more detail there, but everyone will get the opportunity to review the community considerations criteria when it goes out next week as well. And then finally, score weighting, kind of the headlines. So as you can see, this is kind of a graphical depiction of the application categories this group just approved. And so the goal with this whole project was really to align the application categories and application criteria with the TPP goals. So what we did here was a little exercise to kind of go through and identify how each goal appears in the structure. And some of them are specific project categories. Some of other them are application criteria. So you can see there. So for instance, the goal of equitable inclusive does not show up as a specific project category, but it is in that community considerations criteria, which applies across all. Whereas other ones, such as healthy and safe, one of the major goals is both shows up as project categories. We have the new safety categories proposed, as well as a criteria in other applications outside the safety category. And then we did go through an exercise as well for each of the categories and kind of tried to tie the criteria back to the TPP goal that they most align with in order to identify, did we hit the mark in terms of addressing the TPP goals appropriately in each category. So just as some headlines, for instance, you can see here in the safety categories, 80% of the points are come from criteria that are tied back to those healthy and safe category, whereas that 20% is going towards equitable inclusive as it is across all applications. And that really varies based on application category here. You can see the bicycle pedestrian categories have more relating to dynamic and resilient, and some related to healthy and safe. Bicycle and pedestrian really has multiple goals and objectives between the two goals, or objectives and policies between the two goals, etc. Just one measure of note, otherwise I'm not going to go through every category at this point, but can look at others if people have questions. The one exception to this is the local bicycle and pedestrian categories, which instead of tying back to those TPP goals, were created to align with, there are 7 specific legislative requirements in the measure that created that funding source that, pretty directly that directs the criteria that must be used to select those projects. So in this case, those 3 specific categories tie back to a different set of requirements instead of the TPP goals. I guess I can pause there to see, and I realize that was very quick preview of kind of what's coming next. I don't know if any of the council staff have anything additional to add. Otherwise, you can address questions if there are any.
Thanks, Lydia. Just a quick question. I know Innocent, his question kind of alluded to this with the funding being, a number, or funding target being a number. But I'm presuming that there's, these are not reflective of the project deliverables, if you will, or project improvements in those categories. These are reflective of the scoring going in and how we're prioritizing those projects. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah. So in other words, so just taking a look at the bicycle pedestrian category, what we did was kind of take a look at the criteria to determine each criteria was kind of crafted to deliberately align with the objectives and policies of the TPP. So this just looks at what % of the scores in that particular category more directly align with each TPP goal.
Thank you. Excellent. Any other comments? Cool.
Yeah, maybe just to that point in the earlier comment or question from Innocent, there is certainly a lot of mutual benefit in a lot of these goals. And so I think we don't want to lose that on folks, that a lot of the dynamic and resilient objectives also overlap with climate change objectives and healthy and safe objectives. And I think Member Thompson made that same point. So, these are not truly distinct as they're being presented here. It was just how we aligned the criteria relative to the goal structure. But we know that our dynamic and resilient objectives are about, getting people to take alternative modes, which reduces VMT. So take these with maybe a little bit of a grain of salt, I guess, just relative to the TPP structure.
Thanks for that comment. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll move to the next. Whoever's next. Is it Cole? Is it you?
I believe it's
Joe.
me.
Joe. Okay.
But I'll be very quick. As I noted in my comment, this is the same presentation I've given multiple times now, so some of you might have already seen it. So I'll be real brief. So just want to talk a bit about active transportation, kind of the key decisions we've been making at the work group level, and kind of what to expect coming up from that. So we saw some of these already with these action items, but so the policy work group this year, so we reconvened about March this year, have been kind of going through some key questions for the 26th solicitation, including that first one, how to separate those funding considerations by source, so the federal versus local, and we saw that with the project categories, any local match requirements, the minimum maximum award amounts, which we already saw, total funds available, or the target funds, which we already saw today, and then any geographic balance considerations. And then also we wanted to start looking forward to future solicitations. So how is that schedule going to look like moving beyond 2026? Note here that we may not receive a recommendation this year. They're going to discuss it again in their meeting in a couple weeks, but I just want to keep that on the agenda too, to figure out what's the future schedule going to look like beyond 2026. So we already kind of saw these already. So our project categories. So we have those 3 project categories, those 2 infrastructure and the planning category. Our minimum maximum awards with that new active transportation planning to have no minimum, and those reduced minimums for the infrastructure categories. Then our funding target of 50 million and the 2 million sub target. But looking forward, so items that we'll probably be seeing in future meetings here. So the first question here, a big one that we've kind of been discussing a lot at the work group level, is the local match question. So unlike our federal funds, which has a required 20% local match, there is no actual stipulation in the legislation to require a local match for the grant awards for this program. So through our discussions, the work group, the active transportation work group, didn't get a consensus on a specific amount, but they recommended either no local match or a small, potentially 5% local match for the 2026 selected projects. I'll note yesterday the policymaker work group discussed this question as well, and while I didn't hear a formal recommendation, it did appear that they would be going towards a no local match requirement for the 2026 solicitation. Again, looking to break down barriers for our local partners for applying for these funds, and local matches has by many people seen as a barrier to actually applying for grant funds. So I would say we are looking for trending towards that no local match for 2026, but the final decision will rest with the full tab. On project funding eligibility, it's another additional note that I want to note for our partners here. In their discussions on local match, they also wanted to recommend additional eligibility for selected projects. So federal funds, right, are just for the construction elements of projects. However, for these funds starting in 2026, the design and engineering of these projects will also be eligible for funding in addition to those construction elements. So looking to, again, expand what we actually are looking to fund in a specific project beyond just construction, but also to get you to construction as well. Looking at those project category application details, as Lydia just showed a brief preview, but those will be reviewed as well coming up. And then finally, we'll kind of look at a few additional questions which will be decided on or potentially discussed more at our next final meeting. Would be the geographic balance. So what measures, if any, should be established to ensure those AT funds, they're gathered regionally, how are they going to be distributed across the region? And I'll just preview those, what those discussions are looking at here real quickly, and we will open up any potential questions. But that geographic balance question has been out here for a while, and we've kind of been discussing this for a while here, but really looking at focusing on 3 potential options to place on these funds for the 2026 solicitation. First one would be do nothing. So we've got an extra $50 million target here for these funds with those lower maxes and lower minimums. So doing nothing potentially could see naturally more projects are funded throughout the region. These are easier funds to apply for, and so we can kind of sit and wait and see what actually happens in this first solicitation, understand if there needs to be additional measures taken in the future. Another one would be to be splitting them into geographic buckets based on our 2050 community designations. So we've got our urban, suburban, and rural community types, and really just looking to distribute that available funding based upon potentially population or employment or some other measure within those buckets. And finally, a third option that is under consideration would be looking to guarantee at least one project from these geographic buckets, so your urban, suburban, and rural areas, or to potentially limit the number of applications for each agency to ensure the funding is spread around the region. I'll note on these, so the work group has already discussed this and looking to potentially have more discussion in a couple weeks, but the do nothing option is also to them is potentially looking at at what TAB typically does with their selection process, kind of at the end of that process when you score projects, to kind of distribute those funds for projects in each county or areas of the region, how in their typical process they've done federal funds. Before I move on, though, I see Drew, you got your hand up if you want to jump in.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Sorry. When we're talking about splitting into geographic buckets, my only thought on that, and again, speaking, as a county here, counties don't necessarily fall neatly into a bucket. You can see Carver County down here is a good chunk suburban and a good chunk rural. And I think one of the difficulties is if we're basing it on the geographic location of a potential project, then we're competing with potentially like a radically different group of organizations than we would be if it happened to end up in the other bucket. And that's, of course, also not considering projects that might cross over that line.
Drew, correct. And that's something that the policymakers have noted too about this option is, the hypothetical scenario where Hennepin has both rural, suburban, and urban, right? They could potentially get all of those, right? And then everyone else would be kind of, out of luck. So
yeah,
that's definitely something
just wanted to flag that.
Yep. That's something we've heard too. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, and then I just want to just cover this too as we think about this future solicitation and kind of the cadence of this moving on in the future. But one of the questions I'll be looking at and then really making a decision on is, again, how should this be done in the future? Should it be an annual solicitation? So there's no stipulation in the legislation that it has to be biennial or annual. It's really going to be up to TAB to make that decision. And so one of the things that we really need to think about is, is this something we want to do annually? MnDOT with their active transportation program does do annual solicitations, and there's annual solicitations for these types of programs in the other places of the nation. So it's something we have seen, and it definitely presents more opportunities for applications for local governments, right? If you miss 1 year, you maybe come back the next year. You don't have to wait for 2 years. But another option potentially to consider is a biennial option, which would be potentially either in line with the federal solicitation, so similar to how they're doing it in 26, right? Kind of they'll be taking place simultaneously. When you're designing your project applications, you select either the active transportation solicitation or the regional solicitation, or an option biennial but off cycle. So 1 year you'd have your federal, next year you'd have your active transportation, federal, back and forth. So there's always one solicitation every year, but they're just different solicitations per year. And then a sub topic of that would be, if we do a concurrent one with the federal, right, a biennial in the same year, would it be during the same time of the year, or should we stagger these out throughout the year so they're not necessarily taking place at the same time? So these are kind of the things we'll be talking about at the work group level at our October meeting. I know we're over now, but if there's any additional feedback on the timing here or the geographic balance considerations, welcome to hear it, because the policymakers certainly like to hear from their technical support.
Hey, Chair, could I ask a question? It's Michael.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. Joseph, I used to be on the work group when I was chair of this committee, and then I know Jim kind of stepped in. One thing that I brought up early on was, we're talking about geographic balance, but speaking from a city perspective, all of the metro counties are getting formula funds for active transportation, tens of millions of dollars every year that they don't have to compete for. And something I brought up early was, will there be some sort of metric for cities or reflecting that all this other money from the same source is already going to the counties through formula funds, and that kind of leaves the cities out there trying to match all of these county projects, because the counties, not all of them, but a lot of them, cities pay for half of the active transportation infrastructure within county right-of-way. So that was one of my concerns early on, and hopefully at some point that comes up again. But I think it shouldn't get lost looking at the big picture of funding and where cities are at on that. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, we definitely have talked about that issue. I think, we definitely went out there to get kind of the perspective of what the counties are planning on doing, and, if they're going to be potentially updating or revising their kind of cost participation policies in light of the new funds they're getting. And, we've been trying to collect that and understand kind of what the county's thinking too, especially on those topics specifically. And I think, from this first time go around, we wanted to kind of keep it more open and kind of understand where this is going to happen and what's going to really shake out through this process. So even though we did that pilot program, right, to understand how to actually administer these funds in 24, I think the 26 will be our first kind of solicitation to see kind of what happens. And I think, I won't speak for anybody, but I think this work group, similar to the work group we have set up, is probably going to be coming back next year, 27, to understand how this shook out over 26, and then to kind of make recommendations for updates to the solicitation for the next one too. So I don't want to think that this is going to be our first rodeo and we're just going to be done with this for 10 years. This is going to be something that we're going to be probably tweaking potentially every cycle, and as we learn more through each cycle. So that's not something we have forgotten, but it is something that we've kind of had to triage things that we're considering through this process, and that's one of the things we got for the later time.
All right, thank you for that answer.
Other comments? All right, thanks, Joe. Appreciate the presentation and the heads up on what's coming.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for the tab members, but I do think we got a lot of questions answered. So I'm thinking we'll be back for more. So
okay, good. Are there any other presenters, Robbie? Is this does that complete our?
That is the end of the agenda, Chair.
Thanks very much. And thanks for those who stuck around a little bit late. Appreciate that. Again, look for that survey coming out your way regarding next month's meeting, which will certainly be exciting and has a lot of, again, it's a pretty big agenda, pretty hefty lift. So appreciate everybody's research in advance of the meeting and everybody's comment and working through these items. So thank you. With that, I'll call the meeting and as adjourned.